Is this frame okay? Are you ready? Will it come out good?
While the likes of Final Fantasy are well placed in our minds, plenty of other games are one-shot affairs that are often overlooked, yet still remembered by a small few. One of these often overlooked titles is Thousand Arms, an anime-inspired JRPG released in late '98. As a huge JRPG fan, I've only ever dabbled in this game in the past, but now I've gone all in for a review. The general plot of Thousand Arms is pretty well rooted in the genre tropes, and no, that's not always a bad thing. We follow our main hero, Mice, as he travels the world to stop the evil Dark Acolytes, a group bent on taking over the world. After his home is attacked, he begrudgingly sets out on a journey to settle down in a new town and find some babes. Yeah, the secondary theme of this game is a dating sim to meet Mrs. Right. Mice is a pretty typical 90s anime lady chaser. He's crass, full of himself, and kind of a loser who hits on every woman he sees.
Pardon, would you mind making way? My duty is to fill the world with amour. I'm Bandiger, hunter of hearts. Arr. If you give me something, I'll accept it. If not, au revoir!
The story plays it pretty fast and loose throughout the majority of the journey. It's lighthearted and full of humor. Serious moments exist, but they take a backseat to the silliness of the majority of the journey. There's lots of chasing down leads to the next big event, only to be thwarted by the bad guys. Of course, there's plenty of side stuff too, for character interaction and more. It's not a super compelling story, and most of the plot points are pretty predictable. That said, it doesn't make the experience unenjoyable. There's plenty of character interaction to keep the ship afloat, and it plays out like a typical season of an anime, which may or may not be your thing, but the overall narrative doesn't get much more compelling beyond its initial plot point. Simple is definitely the best way to describe it, thanks to relatively few plot twists. Each party member has their role to fill in the group dynamic, and it can lead to some honestly enjoyable moments, especially for those of us who remember 90s era harem anime. Mice is definitely a horn dog protagonist, which leads him to plenty of nonsense situations, and it's contrasted by other party members being quite different from him. It doesn't knock it out of the park story-wise, and it's definitely of its time. Still, as a 90s anime baby, this type of content wasn't outside my expectations, even though I hadn't experienced it for a really long time. Some aspects might rub people the wrong way these days, but it's not without its charm.
What? What? But... Are you all right?
I am not long for this world. I thought it would be wonderful if I could spend time with you before I...
Soshi, knock it off. You won't get anywhere with that sympathy act. Girls aren't that stupid.
The most interesting aspect of the game is its presentation. Featuring anime sprite work and animations, it's impressive even now. When exploring, we're given a chibi-style character to run around towns and dungeons with, a common trait among JRPGs at the time. But when in important dialogue scenes or in combat, it moves to a full anime art style for characters, which is really unique. It almost felt like a visual novel presentation in important moments. There is a surprising amount of them too, which can only be praised. I really enjoyed the large characters for combat and story moments. The perspective switch is really neat and eye-catching. The characters and enemies all have a lot of personality thanks to this as well. I could feel a lot of effort went into making these characters, which is really impressive, even 20 odd years later. The attacks themselves are pretty hit or miss, but major bosses having unique ones too also stood out. Another point of praise is the voice work. While it's not the best by today's standard, given the era that it's from, it's definitely a lot higher caliber than what we're used to of the time. And once again, the sheer amount of it is impressive. Almost every important moment and many of the nonsense ones are voiced. Sadly, the music is where things drop off. It's forgettable all over, and it's especially apparent in the combat. Instead of an exciting theme to get players raring to go, we're treated to a simple tune which is more sleep-inducing than interesting. Also, speaking of the music, the opening theme is done by one of Japan's biggest pop stars, Ayumi Hamasaki. I don't know if this was done before her big break, but this is one heck of a surprise for such a B-tier game. Either someone knew someone, or they had a huge audio budget. The overall gameplay here is where I would knock a few points too. As a JRPG, it's competent, and it has a few of its own unique takes on things too. General exploration is as expected. You run around towns, fields, and dungeons talking to NPCs, grabbing items, fighting, and whatnot. It's all standard fare for the genre. Combat is unique. Here your party of 3 fights together. However, only one member can attack directly while the others take up background positions providing support via items or spells. It's interesting at a glance, but it's hardly my favorite combat system. The setup feels like it slows down the pace of the game more than anything. There really is a slight amount of strategy involved when interrupting enemies, but when I say slight, I mean it. Overall timing is relatively meaningless. Most of the game's battles are pretty easy. It's a shame that the game does something really unique, but it doesn't really translate to an interesting combat system. It's slow, and coupled with uninteresting music, most of the game's battles feel like a drag from fairly early on. Two interesting aspects of the game, however, are the crafting and dating systems, thanks to how they relate to each other. Because our main character is a blacksmith, we upgrade our own weapons. It's an interesting take that I enjoyed. By using forges throughout the game, players can make incremental upgrades as they progress. But like I said, it's linked to the dating system, which took some time to realize its importance without a guide. Using the forge requires the use of a female companion. Each lady has a different set of attributes that can be put into your next upgrade. Elements and abilities differ depending on who's used at the forge. At its core, it's used to change the elemental damage of your base weapon and their damage. The real meat comes into play once you begin placing skills on each character as well. It was surprisingly more involved than I ever assumed it would be, but once I started doing it in earnest, I wasn't overwhelmed. Skills are linked to the female cast members and their affection towards the main character. These skills are passed over to the weapons, meaning that members can learn what's wanted or needed. It's an interesting system, but I do have a major nitpick with it. Abilities can be totally missed if you don't level up affection in a certain way. None are game breaking if you miss them, but if you want to see them all, you'll definitely need a guide. Probably the most unique aspect of the adventure is the dating system. Like I mentioned, it's tied to the upgrades of your items, so it plays a key role in the adventure. Your main party members can be taken out on a date at date spots throughout the game. Once you're out on the town, you can give a gift and answer a series of questions presented by the lady to impress her. These questions are pretty general and don't always feel like they're lining up with what you know about them, but it's not hard to succeed either. If you do well and answer enough questions correctly, the date will give praise and a kiss. Once their affection levels up, you'll get a new skill for that character. The main draw of the date mechanic is to raise affection for the aforementioned skills and upgrades. The main story couplings don't line up with what's happening in the dating, which was a bit disappointing, but it's fine overall. It's not the best system, and it's a bit unwieldy since things can be easily missed. To sum up, the gameplay has a few unique takes on the genre in its combat and ability systems. However, the slow combat really does take a lot out of it. And while the linked dating system and upgrade system is interesting, it doesn't save this game from being a bit of a slog outside major moments. After spending time with the game, I can see why this is considered one of the unique PS1 JRPGs. Its really awesome visual presentation, especially for those who like 90s anime, stands out. The voice script and quality of acting is also noteworthy for 1998. However, this doesn't save it from criticism thanks to a forgettable soundtrack in moments where it really should stand out, like in combat. The story itself is pretty standard fare, but with various attempts at humor, it can be pretty hit or miss. It's lighthearted from start to finish, which is pretty rare for the genre these days, so I couldn't help but get some joy out of it.
He looks so sick.
The overall gameplay isn't going to knock your socks off either. A slow combat system with rare challenge doesn't do the game any favors. The unique theme of dating and upgrading is pretty interesting and novel in its own right, but that's not really enough. At the end of the day, Thousand Arms is praiseworthy for doing some different things compared to its peers in the heyday of the PS1 generation. But those few interesting things don't make up for its flaws. Looking at some of the reviews of the game at the time, it seems like people were fairly positive for a lot of the aspects I mentioned too, but I can't say this is a hidden gem of the generation or anything. If you like PS1 RPGs, it's worth checking out, but I wouldn't blame you if you don't end up finishing it either.
Yes, if what the mirror sees is your true self.
Hey, thanks for watching this review. Hit the thumbs up, like, sub, follow the Twitter, and maybe even stop by my Twitch channel where you can see me play games like this live and more. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again next time.
Oh, there you are, you stupid piece of... How can I be so stupid? How did it get into the locomotive?
Hey, wait! Where are you going? I'm still talking to you. Wait!